On our anniversary, my husband threatened me with a divorce if I didn't sign a loyalty contract. His voice was calm as he said, "It's just business, not personal." I stared at the paper and asked, "Is this because of her?" He blinked. "She's pregnant." My hand shook as I tore the paper in half. "Then she can have you and the debt you hid too." His face went pale as I dropped the shredded lies. "My name's Mira. I'm 48 years old, and I live in Savannah, Georgia. Not the beachside postcard version people think of, but in a quieter part of town where the sidewalks are cracked, where you still see kids biking home after dark, and where everyone knows a little too much about your business. I used to think that was a bad thing. Now I see it's what saved me." The day started out normal. I woke up to the usual creak of the floorboards and the smell of fresh coffee drifting in from the kitchen. Rylan always made the first pot. He liked the quiet hours before anyone else stirred. I used to think it was endearing. In hindsight, maybe he just liked the space to think alone. Or maybe to text her. I came downstairs in my robe, hair tied up in a way he once called charmingly messy. He didn't look up from his phone when I entered the kitchen. That wasn't unusual lately. But he didn't even acknowledge me. Just a muttered, "Morning," eyes locked on the screen. I brushed it off. I told myself he was distracted with work. He ran a logistics consultancy, contracts, vendors, and way too many late-night calls I'd grown used to ignoring. I sat at the counter with my coffee, scrolling through local news, while our daughter Ivy padded into the kitchen in her oversized hoodie, hair a tangled mess. She was always up early when something was bothering her. Teenage girls carry their stress like armor, silent, heavy, but visible if you knew where to look. I glanced at her, then at Rylan. Something felt off. But I didn't want to poke the bear. Not today. It was our 21st anniversary. No huge plans, just dinner at the Gray. We'd eaten there every year since it opened. He made the reservation 2 weeks ago. Or at least that's what he told me. When I called to confirm the time, the hostess mentioned it had been made 3 days ago. That was my first red flag. I ignored it. Denial has a soft, comforting edge to it when you're trying not to unravel. I spent the day cleaning up at the bakery, Sweet Magnolia. It's been my baby for almost 2 decades. When I opened it, I had dreams of French pastries and long queues. In reality, I baked muffins, cupcakes, and biscuits for loyal locals and the occasional tourist who wandered in from River Street. I loved it. I still do. It's the kind of love that's earned, not just felt. By 5, I was home and dressed, plum dress, modest heels, the necklace my mother gave me before she passed. Rylan came downstairs in his blazer, the one I bought him 2 years ago when he landed the regional contract with a national shipping company. He smelled like his cologne, warm, woodsy, familiar. He smiled at me, but it didn't reach his eyes. The drive was mostly quiet. He asked about Ivy's piano lessons and whether Davin had remembered to submit his college applications. Small talk, brittle and dry, like we were two strangers rehearsing lines. I knew something was coming, but I didn't know what. Not yet. Dinner went by in a blur. He barely touched his wine. I barely tasted my food. There was no toasting, no reminiscing about the early years when we had to count coins to afford date night, or how we used to fall asleep laughing at the stupidest things. There was none of that. Just silence interrupted by the clink of cutlery and the occasional forced comment. After dinner, he suggested we walk down to the river. I followed him, heels clicking against the cobblestone, the air thick with humidity and something else, anticipation, maybe dread. We sat on a bench, and he pulled out a manila envelope from his coat. It felt surreal, like I was in a movie, but no one had given me the script. He didn't look at me when he handed it over. "I want you to read this," he said, flatly. I took it, already feeling the chill creep up my spine. I opened it slowly. Inside were 2 pages. Legal terms, printed neatly. I read the heading aloud in a whisper. Loyalty agreement. At first, I thought it was a joke. A bad one. I waited for the punchline. It didn't come. "It's a formal arrangement," he said, still staring straight ahead. "If we both sign, we agree to stay monogamous. No outside involvement. It protects us, legally and personally." I stared at him. "Are you cheating on me?" He didn't answer. Not right away. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, then put it away again. He looked at the water. "She's pregnant." That's all he said. Just those 2 words. Soft. Icy. Like a blade slipped between the ribs. Everything stopped. My thoughts, my breath, the sounds of the street faded. All I could hear was the water lapping gently against the dock and the sound of my heartbeat, suddenly loud and out of rhythm. I tried to stand, but sat back down. My knees had buckled slightly. "She who?" I asked, even though I already knew. I'd seen her once. At his office party. She was young, tall, polished, everything I wasn't anymore. She says it's mine, he continued, his voice robotic. I didn't plan this, Mira. It happened. I was going to handle it quietly. But now, you brought me to dinner to give me legal paperwork. I asked, my voice shaking. To ask me to stay after you got someone else pregnant? His head dropped slightly. It's just business. It's a way to move forward cleanly. I wanted to scream. Instead, I opened the folder again, looked at the second page, and noticed the clause about joint assets, non-disclosure, penalties for violation. This wasn't about saving the marriage. It was about saving his reputation. Protecting himself. From me. I tore the paper in half, then again, and let the pieces fall at his feet. You don't get to call this business, I said. You don't get to hand me lies in a manila envelope on our anniversary. He looked startled. Then pale. You don't want to do this, he said quietly. I looked him in the eye for the first time all night. I already know about the debt. The second mortgage on the lake house. The accounts you emptied to pay off your credit cards. I was just waiting to see how long you'd keep pretending. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. You knew, he whispered. I nodded. He didn't say anything else. I walked away that night without looking back. I drove to Bluffton, to my best friend Shay's place. She didn't ask questions. Just handed me a glass of wine and wrapped me in a blanket. I cried that night, not just for what I lost, but for what I ignored for too long. In the days that followed, it all unraveled. I hired an attorney, then a forensic accountant. What they found made my blood run cold. Rylan had been siphoning money from our joint business accounts for years. Hiding debt. Transferring assets. Gambling, even. The man who once told me we were building a legacy had been using our family as collateral. The findings hit harder than the betrayal itself. What I thought was carelessness, late payments, unexplained business expenses, inconsistent bookkeeping wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Rylan had built a house of cards behind my back, and it had started to collapse months ago. The bakery had been his temporary shield. Our joint income gave him access to loans under both our names. It explained the random approvals for lines of credit I'd never applied for, the debt collectors who hung up when I answered the phone, and the sudden interest he'd taken in helping with payroll. I remember sitting in the accountant's office, the papers in front of me, every signature of mine forged with alarming precision. I felt sick. Betrayal didn't always come as an affair or a lie told aloud. It often crept in through silence, through omissions, through choices made in rooms you never entered. I didn't cry that day. I felt nothing at all. The lawyer told me to play it calm, not to confront him further. We needed more evidence, proof of intentional fraud, paper trails, misuse of marital assets. I listened. I nodded. I followed every instruction like I was studying for a test that would determine whether I could reclaim my own life. Meanwhile, at home, things were unraveling quietly. Ivy refused to speak to Rylan. She stopped eating dinner with us. Stopped asking if we could watch movies together like we used to. Davin took the opposite approach. He became louder, defensive, and confrontational with his dad. There was one evening when I heard shouting from the driveway. I rushed outside, still in flower-streaked clothes from the bakery, to find Rylan standing by the car, fists clenched, while Davin yelled about being sick of the lies. Is it true? Davin shouted. Are you leaving Mom for some other woman? Rylan had no answer. Just silence. He left shortly after. Packed a duffel bag and said he'd be staying at a friend's place until things calmed down. No apology. No explanation. Just a slammed door and the sound of tires on gravel. The next few weeks were a kind of limbo I wouldn't wish on anyone. My days were filled with bakery orders, financial meetings, and phone calls I didn't want to answer. My nights were sleepless. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly I'd stopped recognizing the man I married. Was it during the countless late nights he said he was working? Or when he stopped asking me how my day was? Or maybe the moment he started wearing cologne to 9 p.m. strategy meetings. Ivy cried often but quietly, her sobs muffled behind her bedroom door. I let her have her space. I knew pushing would only make her retreat further. Davin, meanwhile, threw himself into basketball practice and college prep, anything to avoid being home. I spent hours each day going through years of receipts, checking business records, scanning old emails. Every time I thought I had a handle on it, something else surfaced, a transaction, an unexplained wire, a lie buried deep. I had built that bakery from nothing. It bore my name, my soul, and now it was the collateral damage in my husband's descent. One night, Shay came over with 2 bottles of wine and a folder of legal articles she printed from work. She's a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Bluffton. You need to be ready, she said, pouring me a glass. He's not going to go quietly. I nodded. I knew she was right. Rylan was the kind of man who liked to control the story. He didn't care who he hurt as long as he looked clean. A few days later, I got the call from my attorney. Rylan had officially retained counsel. That meant war. Not negotiation. Not amicable resolution. He was gearing up for a fight. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get messier, it did. I was finishing a wedding cake order when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just one sentence. You should know what he's telling people about you. Attached was a screenshot of a social media post from one of Rylan's old business associates. It was vague, but it hinted at a wife draining company funds out of spite. The comments were worse, people speculating, assuming, siding with him. The narrative was being rewritten, and I wasn't in control of it. That's when I made the decision to go public, not on social media, but with my community. I called a meeting with my staff, told them everything. I didn't cry. I didn't spin it. I just told the truth. I need to fight for what I've built, I said. If anyone wants to leave, I understand. No one left. Instead, they offered to help. One of the girls, Lila, said her cousin worked for a financial firm that could dig even deeper into Rylan's accounts. Another staffer brought me a flash drive with backups of invoices going back 3 years, ones I didn't even know existed. It was like watching the tide shift. I wasn't alone anymore. Meanwhile, Rylan made his next move. He showed up at the bakery one afternoon, unannounced, just as I was closing up. He stood at the counter, not looking out of place, just familiar in a way that suddenly felt wrong. I need to talk, he said. I have nothing to say, I replied, calmly. He looked around the empty bakery. It's not what you think. I tilted my head. Really? Because I think you manipulated me, lied to me, stole from me, and humiliated our family. He flinched. She said it was mine, he offered, almost desperately. The baby. I believed her. But it's not. I stared at him for a long moment. And that changes what, exactly? He didn't answer. The silence between us stretched like a rubber band. Then he finally said, I want to make this right. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe the audacity. You want to fix it now? After you tried to trap me in a contract on our anniversary. He shifted on his feet. It was a mistake. No, I said, voice steady. It was a decision. He looked like he might argue, but then he just nodded, turned, and walked out. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the ledger for Sweet Magnolia. I thought about everything I had to lose. My kids, my business, my peace. But I also thought about what I'd already lost and how much of it I was finally reclaiming. Even on quiet evenings, when the kids were tucked into their rooms and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house, I couldn't settle. My mind kept running, always racing through numbers, timelines, memories. Some nights I'd sit on the edge of my bed, staring at the corner of the wall where the paint was chipped. It was easier to focus on that than the idea that the man I'd built a life with had spent years unraveling it behind my back. The court filings came next, thick envelopes filled with legalese that made my head spin. Rylan's legal team was aggressive. They claimed I had mismanaged funds from the bakery, that I had been emotionally absent in the marriage, and even tried to argue that I had influenced the children to turn against him. It was laughable. But nothing about this process was funny. The worst part was how calmly he moved through it all. I'd see him across the courtroom, clean-shaven, pressed suit, no sign of the chaos he'd created, and he'd act as though none of it touched him. He'd look at me like I was the difficult one. Like I was the problem. I think that part hurt more than anything else. At one point during the hearings, we had to be in mediation. A stuffy conference room in a downtown law office with too much glass and no soul. Rylan sat across from me, a legal pad in front of him, flipping pages like it was a business negotiation. He didn't look at me once during that entire session. The mediator asked if we were open to compromise, and I remember saying, not when he's still lying. I could tell it stung him, even though he didn't show it. His jaw tightened for half a second. But then it passed, and he went back to scribbling in the margins like none of this was personal. But it was personal. It was all personal. The kids were struggling. Ivy started seeing the school counselor. She wouldn't admit she was having a hard time, but I knew. Her grades dropped. Her laugh disappeared. Even the way she walked changed, like her shoulders were always braced for something. Davin tried to act like he was fine. He threw himself into college applications, started volunteering at a local youth center, and tried to fill every spare minute. But he stopped calling his dad. Cold turkey. When Rylan tried to text him, he showed me the messages and said, "Do I have to respond?" I told him no. At one point, Rylan emailed me, long, dramatic, half apology, half manifesto. He said he didn't want to burn the bridge, that we had too much history to let things get ugly. He mentioned our wedding, our first apartment in Charleston, the miscarriage I had in year 3, all the things that hurt to remember. He closed it with, "You were always my best friend. I just didn't know how to keep you and be who I needed to be at the same time." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to my lawyer. Sweet Magnolia became my sanctuary. The kitchen smelled like safety, vanilla, butter, cinnamon. My hands stayed busy. My heart stayed guarded. Word started spreading around the neighborhood. Customers would linger longer, give me small smiles, ask about the kids. One older woman, Mrs. Halpern, came in every Tuesday and bought the same lemon bars. She told me once, "You hold yourself well, Mira." Dignity shows more in silence than in shouting. It stuck with me. But not everyone was kind. Some of Ryland's former friends, business associates, spouses of other consultants, stopped coming in. A few gave me long, pitying stares when they saw me at the market. One even dared to ask, "Are you sure you want to air all this in court?" Sometimes women come out of it looking worse. I didn't answer. I just stared at her, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Meanwhile, Shay kept me grounded. She came over almost every weekend, bringing files or chocolate or both. She never pushed, never asked for more than I was willing to give, and always told me when I was about to spiral too far. "You have to start thinking about the next chapter," she said one night as we sat on my porch, rain tapping the roof. "He's still writing your story. You need to take the pen back." I wanted to believe her. Some days I did. Other days, it felt like too much had been lost. The depositions were beer tall. They asked me questions that made me feel like I was the one on trial, how many hours I worked, how I handled money, how I reacted when I found out about the affair. At one point, Ryland's lawyer even insinuated that maybe I had neglected my husband emotionally, that maybe I wasn't attentive enough. I nearly walked out. But then I looked at the man across the table, so composed, so indifferent, and I thought about all the nights I had cried beside him in silence. The times I had carried the weight for both of us. The hours I spent building something he clearly didn't value. I didn't walk out. I stayed. And when it was over, I went home, baked 6 dozen chocolate chip cookies, and sent every last one to the local fire department just because I needed to do something good for someone. That's what kept me sane, doing good, even when life felt anything but. Ivy eventually started talking again. Not a lot, not about everything, but enough. One afternoon, she came into the bakery after school, plopped onto a stool, and watched me frost cupcakes. "You know what's weird," she said. "I don't miss him." I looked at her, surprised. "I thought I would," she said, picking at the edge of the counter. "But I don't. Not really." I walked around and hugged her. Neither of us said anything for a while. There were still court dates ahead. Still financial disclosures. Still custody details to iron out. But somewhere in the middle of the storm, I stopped feeling like a victim. I started feeling like myself again. The final court date arrived on a humid Wednesday morning in late August. The air outside felt thick enough to chew, and the courthouse smelled like old paper and air conditioning. I wore a navy suit Shay helped me pick out, sharp, professional, the kind that made me sit taller just by wearing it. My hair was pulled back neatly. No jewelry. No drama. Just presence. Ryland sat across the courtroom, his lawyer whispering in his ear. He looked smaller somehow. Maybe it was the months of stress, or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time in years, without the filter of loyalty or the weight of what I used to feel. The judge read through the agreements. His tone was dry, businesslike. Ryland was being ordered to pay back a significant portion of the funds he'd siphoned from the business, funds he had funneled into personal expenses, secret investments, and Mara's high-rise apartment lease. I kept my face neutral as the terms were read aloud. But inside, I felt something subtle. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something deeper. Like balance. I was awarded full ownership of Sweet Magnolia. The bakery would no longer have his name attached to anything, not the lease, not the vendor contracts, not the payroll. It was mine. Entirely mine. Primary custody of the kids went to me. Ivy and Davin had already expressed their preferences, and the court listened. Ryland would get scheduled visitations every other weekend, holidays split, but only if the kids wanted them. Neither of them looked interested. After the judge adjourned, I walked out of that courtroom with Shay by my side and a dozen thoughts in my head. There was no applause. No triumphant music playing. Just the quiet click of my heels on marble floors and the weight of the last 21 years slipping off, piece by piece. I didn't return to the bakery right away. Instead, I took a drive. Not far, just to Tybee Island. I sat by the water, letting the salt air clear my head. It had been years since I came here alone. I watched a family nearby building a crooked sandcastle, the kids arguing playfully over whose moat was better. And I thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not perfect. Not easy. But honest. A few weeks later, Sweet Magnolia had its best month in 5 years. The community showed up in droves. People I hadn't seen in months came by to buy peach cobbler, banana bread, and cinnamon rolls like their lives depended on it. There was a steady stream of compliments, quiet support, nods from people who knew what I'd been through without needing the details. I started offering baking classes on weekends, and they sold out almost immediately. I even began mentoring a few high school girls who wanted to open businesses of their own one day. And Rylan? He tried, for a while, to regain some footing. He'd send emails every now and then, updates, lukewarm apologies, pictures of furniture in his new condo in Charlotte. I never replied. But it didn't stop there. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a message from a woman named Jenna. She had worked for the same logistics firm Rylan was now consulting with, and she'd seen my name on some of the bakery's vendor paperwork. Her message was polite but direct. You might want to know he's pitching a new business under your old bakery's financials. Claims partial founding credit. I felt my stomach twist, not in fear, but in disbelief. It wasn't enough that he'd lost everything. He wanted to rewrite the past, too. I didn't say anything. I just forwarded the email to my attorney. Within days, Rylan received a cease and desist order, legally binding, ironclad. Any use of Sweet Magnolia's brand, history, or assets was forbidden. He didn't fight it. Not because he agreed, but because he knew I had the paperwork, the witnesses, and the proof to bury him in legal fees if he pushed. But that wasn't the best part. The best part came a month later when I got a call from a major local food and beverage distributor. They were expanding into the region and looking for community-rooted partners with strong reputations. They'd heard about Sweet Magnolia, about me, about the quiet comeback story behind the cupcakes and pies, and they wanted to feature us in their fall campaign. I accepted. We did a photo shoot in the bakery kitchen. Ivy helped set up the space, and Davin, who'd just committed to Georgia Tech, took photos with his old Canon for the behind-the-scenes. The campaign ran through October, and suddenly I was fielding press inquiries, social media shout-outs, and even an invitation to speak on a panel for women entrepreneurs. One morning, I walked into the bakery and found a man standing at the counter, flipping through a magazine with my face on the cover. He looked up, sheepish. "Is this you?" he asked. I smiled. "Depends who's asking." He laughed, introduced himself, just a tourist passing through. But I saw the look in his eyes. Respect. Not pity. Not curiosity. Just honest admiration. That was the moment I knew. He couldn't touch me anymore. Rylan had taken so much from me. Years. Trust. Security. But in trying to strip me of everything, he'd accidentally handed me something far more valuable. He gave me back the parts of myself I had almost forgotten. The ambition. The strength. The grit. And no contract in the world could undo that.